Earth had always seemed quiet from the eyes of the universe. People on the planet went about their daily lives, thinking of the problems at home, the traffic, the work, the laughter of friends, or the warmth of family. Few looked beyond the stars, and even fewer imagined that someone or something might be watching. But far beyond the solar system, in the dark emptiness of space, a network of silent observers had been scanning countless worlds, and Earth had quietly been added to a list dot. No alarm sounded. No sirens blared. It was all invisible, unnoticed by anyone on the planet. The stars twinkled in the night sky the same way they always had, but a few were far more than distant lights. They were eyes recording, marking, and measuring dot at a small observatory on the outskirts of a quiet city. A young astronomer had just started his night shift. He was used to long hours, alone in the dark with telescopes and computers, scanning signals that most people would never even think about. On this night, he noticed something unusual. At first, he thought it was a technical glitch. A series of faint signals, patterns that didn't match anything recorded before, kept repeating every few minutes. He rubbed his eyes and adjusted the controls, trying to make sense of it. The signals weren't coming from a nearby satellite or a known star. They were coming from deep space, from multiple directions. Even stranger, the signals seemed to form a sequence, almost as if they were watching, waiting, studying. For hours, he recorded and analyzed. He compared the patterns with known cosmic phenomena, pulsars, quasars, even random interference from distant galaxies. But nothing fit. The more he studied, the more he realized this wasn't random noise. Something or someone was observing Earth in a way no one had noticed before. Despite his excitement, he felt a twinge of fear. It wasn't clear if the observers were friendly or hostile, or why they would focus on a small blue planet like Earth. Still, he couldn't keep it to himself. He contacted a few trusted colleagues in the field, people who might understand what he had discovered. But when he explained what he saw, the responses were skeptical. "It's probably interference," one colleague said, "or some natural anomaly we haven't studied enough." Another added, "Signals like that appear all the time. Don't get carried away." The young astronomer couldn't argue. Most people would think it was impossible, even crazy, to imagine intelligent beings marking Earth as a target. But deep inside, he knew he had discovered something that could change everything. He couldn't shake the feeling that the planet itself was in danger, even if no one knew it yet. Days passed, and the patterns grew more complex. The signals appeared not only at night, but at times when Earth's rotation and position in space changed. It was as if the observers were mapping the planet, studying its movement, and calculating something beyond human understanding. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, an older radio engineer spent her evenings tinkering with old equipment in her garage. She loved listening to the stars, picking up faint sounds that others dismissed as static. It was a hobby, but she was meticulous. Every tone, every variation, every subtle change in frequency mattered to her. One night, while adjusting an old amplifier, she picked up a signal unlike anything she had heard before. It was subtle, almost hidden beneath background noise, but distinct. She recorded it, analyzed it, and compared it to other signals she had collected over the years. Slowly, a chilling realization settled in. This wasn't just a random cosmic pattern. It was coordinated. Someone was intentionally observing Earth. Her curiosity was matched by unease. Who could be listening, and why? The more she studied, the more she realized that Earth was no longer just a quiet planet spinning in space. It had become the focus of attention, and the observers weren't silent this time. They were calculating, marking, and planning. Eventually, the engineer reached out to the young astronomer. They exchanged data, compared observations, and began to see the truth together. Earth was not just another world in the vast universe. It had been singled out. The signals were precise, systematic, and repeated. The planet was on a list somewhere, in some part of the galaxy. Its name was written as the next target. The thought was almost unbelievable. Humanity had always imagined being watched by aliens as part of science fiction, but no one had expected it to happen. Now, the reality was unavoidable. Both the astronomer and the engineer worked day and night, poring over their findings. They tracked the signal's origin, measured the timings, and tried to understand the purpose behind it. Was it reconnaissance? A warning? Or preparation for something far more dangerous? They didn't know. All they could do was observe, analyze, and prepare for the worst. The young astronomer often stayed at the observatory until dawn, watching Earth rotate in the night sky through his telescope. He thought about the billions of people sleeping peacefully, unaware of the eyes fixed upon them. Children played in their yards, couples walked along city streets, and families shared meals, all blissfully ignorant. A pang of responsibility settled on him. He had to find a way to warn the world, even if no one might believe him. The engineer, on the other hand, worked quietly in her garage, adjusting antennas and creating makeshift amplifiers to capture clearer signals. She was methodical, patient, and determined. The more she listened, the more the patterns revealed themselves, not just as simple signals, but as a complex map of Earth's position, rotation, and even electromagnetic activity. Whoever was watching had advanced technology far beyond human understanding. Even though they were thousands of miles apart, their minds worked in sync. Both understood that the planet itself could be in danger. Both knew that if the signals continued, and if the watchers had the wrong intentions, Earth might not survive. The thought was terrifying, but it also gave them purpose. They were the first line of awareness, the only ones awake while the rest of humanity slept out late one night. The astronomer noticed something new. Within the repeating pattern, a strange anomaly appeared, a sequence that didn't match the rest of the signal. It was like a signature, something that indicated not only observation, but intent. He felt a shiver run down his spine. If the observers could mark Earth, could they also decide what happens next? Could they act upon their calculations? He immediately contacted the engineer, sending her the recordings and analyses. She listened carefully, then spoke with a calm that masked her inner tension. "This isn't just observation," she said. "They're assessing. They're deciding. Earth isn't just a point in the sky anymore. It's under review." For hours, they discussed possibilities, each more frightening than the last. The humans had never imagined being evaluated on a cosmic scale. It was almost impossible to comprehend, but the evidence was undeniable. Something or someone had singled out Earth, and the planet had no voice in the matter yet. As the first part of their discovery came to an end, both realized a simple truth. Earth's quiet existence had been shattered. Humans had no idea their world was being watched, no idea they were marked, and no idea that a single message in the future might determine the fate of billions. For now, the astronomer and the engineer were the only witnesses to this silent marking, the only ones awake in the vast, indifferent universe. And they knew one thing: time was not on Earth's side, and the next step would decide everything. The days after their first discovery were filled with quiet tension. The astronomer and the engineer were no longer just casual observers of the sky. Every beep, every flicker on their monitors, every subtle pattern in the static carried weight. Earth, which had always felt safe and ordinary, now seemed fragile, exposed to forces far beyond human understanding. The engineer spent long hours adjusting her old radio array. It was crude by modern standards, but with careful calibration, it could pick up signals invisible to even the most advanced satellites. As she listened, she noticed changes in the signal's subtle shifts in frequency, brief pauses, and bursts of data that seemed almost like communication. She recorded everything, knowing that any single piece could hold the key to understanding what was happening. Meanwhile, the astronomer pored over star charts and historical records of deep space signals. He had spent years tracking comets, satellites, and radio bursts, but nothing had prepared him for this. The signal patterns didn't match anything documented in human records. They weren't natural. They weren't random. Someone or something was studying Earth deliberately. The thought was chilling. As they compared notes, a clearer picture began to emerge. The signals were not just random markers. They were measurements. The observers were monitoring Earth's rotation, electromagnetic fields, and even subtle changes in its atmosphere. It was as if the planet itself was under examination, every detail logged and analyzed. The astronomer realized that this went far beyond curiosity. Whoever was sending the signals had a purpose, and Earth's place in the universe was no longer just a quiet blue dot. The engineer suggested a cautious approach. "We need to understand what they want before we make any noise ourselves," she said. Her hands moved over her old equipment with precision, tuning the antennas, amplifying certain frequencies, and filtering out the cosmic background. If we respond too quickly, we could make a mistake. But the astronomer felt differently. Staying silent seemed dangerous. If these observers had marked Earth for a reason, waiting could allow whatever plan they had to continue without interference. He suggested they start crafting a small, simple message of signal that announced Earth's existence, its peaceful nature, and its desire to understand. The engineer hesitated. "Sending a message could be risky," she said. "We don't know who will hear it or what they will think. But maybe it's our only choice." They agreed to work together, carefully balancing caution and action. For days, they analyzed every fragment of signal, every pattern in the bursts, looking for hints about the observer's intentions. They discovered that the signals originated from multiple points in deep space, forming a kind of invisible triangle around the planet. The scale and precision were staggering. Whoever was doing this had technology far beyond anything humans had created. As the days passed, the weight of their discovery began to settle in. They realized that Earth was not just observed, it was judged. Somewhere in the galaxy, intelligence far older and more advanced than humanity had taken note of the planet and was evaluating it. The astronomer couldn't stop thinking about the billions of people going about their lives, unaware that their home had been marked. Children played in parks, people commuted to work, families gathered for meals, all of it happening under a silent gaze from beyond the stars. One evening, the engineer detected a new kind of pattern. It was faint, almost hidden, but distinct from the normal signals. She compared it to their earlier recordings and noticed something alarming. The observers were refining their measurements, adjusting based on Earth's activity. It was as if the planet's behavior, human behavior, was being factored into a calculation. When she shared this with the astronomer, he felt a knot of fear in his stomach. "They are not just watching," he said. "They are learning. They are studying how we act. And if they've marked us, this could mean they are deciding something." The engineer nodded, her eyes reflecting the glow of the monitors. "We need to be ready for anything. But maybe we can also show them something they haven't seen. Something that proves we are worth understanding, not dismissing." They spent the next several nights working together. The engineer modified her equipment to send a clear signal, while the astronomer drafted the message. They kept it simple. There would be no threats, no demands, no declarations of power. Just a statement of existence, of peace, and of curiosity. They wanted the message to speak for humanity, without sounding desperate or naive. In the process, both began to feel the enormity of what they were doing. They were ordinary people, one, an astronomer, the other, a hobbyist engineer, but they held the first line of communication for an entire planet. Every choice, every word, every detail mattered. One mistake could invite danger. One wrong frequency could change everything. The nights grew longer, filled with careful calculations, endless checks, and whispered conversations about what to include. They debated whether to mention human achievements, the fragility of life on Earth, or simply to say that humans were peaceful and curious. Finally, they agreed on a few simple sentences, repeated multiple times in the transmission, so it could be detected even at great distances. As they prepared to send it, the astronomer stepped outside, looking at the night sky. He imagined the vast distances, the countless stars, and the unseen eyes that had been watching. His thoughts went to every person asleep below him. He thought about how small Earth seemed in the galaxy, yet how powerful one small action could be. The engineer joined him outside, holding a notebook filled with signal patterns and adjustments. "We may never know who will receive this," she said softly. "But if they are intelligent, maybe they will understand. Maybe they will see that we are not a threat." They returned to their equipment and initiated the transmission. The signal was simple, repeating, and clear. It carried the essence of humanity, our desire to exist, to explore, and to communicate. They watched the monitors nervously, waiting for any response, any indication that someone had heard. At first, nothing happened. Hours passed. The silence of space pressed in around them. But then, subtle changes appeared in the signals they had been tracking. Patterns shifted, frequencies altered, and bursts of data came in that had never been there before. Someone had received their message. The astronomer and the engineer exchanged a glance, a mix of awe and fear in their eyes. They had done it. They had reached out to the galaxy. But the reactions were not what they expected. Some signals carried caution, others carried confusion, and a few seemed almost alarmed. Their simple message had triggered responses across the observing network. It became clear that Earth was no longer just a target or a point of interest. The message had disrupted a delicate balance in the galaxy. Whoever was watching had noticed humanity in a way that changed everything. The astronomer realized that they had not only made contact, they had shifted the focus of countless eyes, possibly saving the planet from being overlooked, but also exposing it to attention they could not control. Despite the fear, they felt a spark of hope. Their message had been heard. Their world was no longer invisible. And now, for the first time, humans had a voice in the vast silence of space. Late into the night, they continued to monitor the signals, recording every change, every new pattern, and every response. The universe was no longer distant and indifferent. It was aware, watching, and responding. And for the astronomer and the engineer, life had changed forever. They were no longer just observers. They were messengers, guardians, and witnesses to a moment in history that no one else could yet understand. As dawn approached, they looked at Earth below them, bathed in the soft light of the rising sun. People stirred, unaware that the planet they called home had just sent its first greeting to the stars. The astronomer felt a deep sense of responsibility, and the engineer felt a quiet pride. They had taken the first step into something far bigger than themselves. Somewhere in the galaxy, eyes were still watching, calculating, and responding. Earth had been marked, but it had also been noticed in a way that might protect it, might challenge it, and might change its fate forever. And for the two humans who had stayed awake that night, the journey had only just begun. After their first message reached the distant watchers, the astronomer and the engineer knew that the quiet of space had changed forever. Days turned into nights filled with anticipation. Every time they checked their monitors, every flicker of data made their hearts beat faster. Signals arrived more frequently now, not random bursts, but sequences that seemed deliberate, almost like responses. At first, they couldn't understand the meaning. The data came in patterns that shifted too quickly for them to decipher immediately. Some sequences were repeated, others altered slightly. It was clear that whoever or whatever was observing Earth was not just listening. They were reacting. They were studying Earth's message, examining it in ways humans had never imagined. The astronomer stayed at the observatory almost around the clock. He felt a growing sense of responsibility. Each signal was a clue, a piece of a puzzle that could mean survival or danger for billions of people who were still unaware of the silent attention they had attracted. He carefully mapped the new signals, noting changes in intensity, frequency, and timing. He could see patterns emerging, almost as if a conversation was beginning without words. Without sound humans could hear, but with intent that was undeniable. Meanwhile, the engineer worked tirelessly in her garage, adjusting her equipment to capture the responses more clearly. She was a master of improvisation. Using old components and careful wiring, she amplified the signals and filtered out background noise. The clearer she made the signals, the more she realized that there was intelligence behind them. A precise calculation that suggested not only awareness of Earth, but also a concern or perhaps surprise at its unexpected response. One evening, the astronomer noticed something unusual. A segment of the signal repeated in a pattern that mirrored the original message they had sent. At first, he thought it was coincidence. But as he studied it more closely, he realized that the observers were not just reacting randomly. They were trying to understand, almost like humans reading a foreign language for the first time. "This is incredible," he said quietly, almost to himself. "They are learning. They are interpreting our message." The engineer looked over his shoulder, her eyes reflecting both excitement and worry. "And they are fast. We can't know what they might decide next." For several days, they focused all their attention on decoding this response. Each new fragment of data suggested that the observers were not hostile, at least not yet, but they were cautious. The astronomer and the engineer realized that their small act of sending a simple greeting had disrupted something in the galaxy. Earth had been under silent observation, marked as a target, or at least as a point of interest. Their message had forced a reaction, and that reaction was spreading out. The tension grew when they noticed a pattern that repeated across multiple observation points. It was as if the watchers were communicating among themselves about Earth. The astronomer stared at the data for hours, trying to imagine what decisions could be made in places so far away, by beings whose minds operated on a scale he could barely comprehend. The engineer tapped her pen nervously against the desk. "Whatever this is," she said, "Earth is no longer invisible. We've changed the game. And now we have to be careful." Even as they worked, the world below continued in its ordinary rhythm. People laughed, argued, slept, and dreamed, completely unaware that the night sky had changed in meaning. For the astronomer and the engineer, this contrast was almost unbearable. They were awake, alert, and burdened with a secret that could not be shared. They were the first humans to witness the beginning of a response from the galaxy. The astronomer tried to focus on the positive. Their message had been received, which meant Earth had a chance to communicate, to be understood. Perhaps this could prevent disaster. Perhaps intelligence beyond human imagination would recognize that the planet was home to life that was curious, peaceful, and capable of cooperation. But the possibility of misunderstanding always lurked in the back of their minds. One misread signal, one wrong interpretation, and the observers might see Earth as a threat. The engineer worked quietly, but felt the same tension. She had built and tested radios and antennas for years, but nothing had prepared her for this. The night sky had become a living network, a web of eyes and minds that they could only partially understand. Each night she checked her equipment, adjusted it carefully, and recorded the signals. Some of the responses seemed almost emotional, strange bursts that hinted at surprise, caution, or curiosity. They were unlike anything human technology could replicate. Together, the astronomer and the engineer developed a careful plan. They would continue to monitor the signals, record every response, and prepare a second message. The first had been simple, a greeting. The second would be more detailed. They wanted to demonstrate that humans were intelligent, capable of reason, and willing to communicate. But they knew they had to proceed cautiously. Any signal sent back could have consequences they could not predict. As they analyzed the incoming data, they noticed a moment that made both of them pause. One of the sequences contained information that suggested awareness of Earth's environment. The observers seemed to know about the planet's oceans, its atmosphere, even patterns in its magnetic field. This wasn't just casual observation. Whoever had been marking Earth was now paying attention to details that could only be detected with extremely advanced technology. The astronomer leaned back, his mind racing. They know where we are. They know what we are made of. They are aware of the planet itself. The engineer nodded slowly, which means they can also know our weaknesses. We have to assume they can see almost everything about us. Fear mixed with awe as they realized the scale of what they were dealing with. They were ordinary humans, yet they had become the first line of contact between Earth and intelligence far beyond human understanding. The stakes were enormous. One wrong move, one misread signal, and the consequences could be catastrophic. Despite the fear, a sense of wonder also grew. The astronomer often stood outside at night, staring at the stars and imagining the minds that watched them. He pictured beings who had observed the galaxy for thousands or even millions of years. And now, for the first time, humans had become visible to them. The engineer felt similarly, imagining eyes that could see Earth as clearly as a person could see a garden. Minds that could process information at speeds and scales beyond comprehension. Their work continued day and night. They developed a routine. The engineer captured and amplified the signals, while the astronomer analyzed, mapped, and interpreted. They shared everything with each other, knowing that collaboration was their only hope of understanding the strange responses. Sometimes they argued about interpretation, but every disagreement was rooted in the same goal, to protect Earth and make sense of the signals. One night, after weeks of monitoring, a new sequence appeared. It was longer, more complex, and seemed to carry a warning. It was not hostile, but it suggested that Earth's actions were being scrutinized very carefully. The astronomer felt a chill. "They are deciding," he whispered. "They are evaluating whether we are ready, or whether we are dangerous." The engineer adjusted her equipment to get a clearer read. "We have to prove that we are not a threat," she said. "But how do we do that when we are so small, so inexperienced in the universe?" They realized that they had no choice but to continue. Silence was no longer an option. Earth had been marked, observed, and now evaluated. Any further delay could be risky. They began drafting a more detailed message, one that described humanity's curiosity, its peaceful nature, and its desire to learn and cooperate. It was careful, thoughtful, and repeated across frequencies to ensure it would be received. As the astronomer prepared the transmission, he thought about everyone on Earth, children asleep in their beds, workers driving home, families eating dinner. None of them knew that the planet was being observed, evaluated, and discussed by minds far older and more advanced. A sense of responsibility pressed down on him. He and the engineer were the only ones awake to this moment, the only ones who could speak for the entire planet. Finally, the message was ready. They would send it the next night, carefully timed to coincide with patterns they had detected in the observer's signals. It was their chance to show that humans were not just a curiosity, but beings capable of communication, reason, and care. As they waited for the moment to transmit, they reflected on how much their lives had changed. They were no longer just an astronomer and a hobbyist engineer. They had become the guardians of a secret that could determine the fate of billions. The weight was heavy, but so was the pride of being the first humans to step into the unknown. to reach across the void and to speak to the galaxy. Somewhere in the darkness of space, the observers were watching, learning, and reacting. Earth had been marked, yes, but now it had a voice. And for the astronomer and the engineer, the next night would be the beginning of a conversation that could change everything. The night had a different weight that evening. For weeks, the astronomer and the engineer had been preparing, studying, and analyzing. They had monitored the signals from the galaxy, tried to understand them, and debated endlessly about what to include in their next message. Tonight, it would happen. Tonight, Earth would speak in a way it never had before. The engineer double-checked every connection, every wire, and every amplifier. She worked with precision, tuning the frequencies to perfection. Even the smallest interference could distort the message, and they could not afford mistakes. The old equipment had served her well, but this was more than a hobby now. It was a mission that could change everything. The astronomer reviewed the text of the message one last time. It was simple, careful, and clear. There were no demands, no threats, and no signs of fear. Just a statement of existence, that Earth was home to intelligent life, that humans were curious, peaceful, and willing to communicate. It was repeated across multiple frequencies, ensuring that no matter how the observers listened, the message could reach them. They both knew that once the transmission began, there would be no turning back. The signal would ripple across space, traveling light years, and reach entities that had marked Earth as a point of interest. Some would react with curiosity, some with caution, and perhaps some with hostility. But they also knew that staying silent had risks. If the watchers were planning something and humans remained passive, the consequences could be worse. The astronomer looked at the night sky one last time before sending. The stars twinkled like millions of tiny eyes, distant and cold, yet somehow alive with attention. Somewhere among them, someone or something was watching, waiting, calculating. And now, Earth would announce itself, its voice finally reaching out. The engineer pressed the final switch. The equipment hummed, electricity running through carefully connected wires, amplifying the signal beyond what ordinary instruments could do. A quiet pulse began to ripple out into space, carrying the words and intent of all humanity. It was small, yes, in the vastness of the universe, but it was deliberate, strong, and clear. For the first few hours, there was only silence. The astronomer and the engineer watched the monitors, their eyes straining to detect even the faintest change. Every flicker of light or change in the signals made their hearts race. They waited, hoping that someone would hear, that the message would be understood. Then, slowly, responses began to appear. At first, they were subtle, almost like whispers in the static. Patterns shifted, frequencies altered, and bursts of data came in that had not been there before. The observers were reacting. They were not hostile, but they were alert. Their attention had shifted from passive observation to active monitoring. Earth was no longer just a quiet planet spinning in space. It was alive with communication, and the galaxy had taken notice. The astronomer felt a mixture of awe and fear. He realized that the message had disrupted something delicate. Whoever had marked Earth as a target or as a point of interest now had to consider this new variable. Humans had spoken. They had shown curiosity, intelligence, and a desire for peace. And the observers could not ignore it. The engineer adjusted the equipment, filtering the incoming signals and amplifying the parts that seemed deliberate. She noticed patterns that suggested conversation, almost like a language she could not yet understand. Some sequences were repeated, as if they were testing comprehension. Others shifted slightly, as if the observers were experimenting, trying to see how humans would respond next. They worked together in silence, communicating through nods and gestures. Every new signal was analyzed, every pattern mapped. They realized that Earth's first message had caused reactions across multiple observers, not just one. Somewhere in the galaxy, networks of intelligence were now aware of the planet, discussing it, evaluating it, and perhaps even protecting it. The astronomer felt a shiver run down his spine. "They are talking about us," he said quietly. "They are not just listening. They are communicating with each other. And we can't even understand it fully yet." The engineer nodded. "Which means our next steps are critical. We have to be careful, but we also have to respond. We can't let the moment pass." Over the next several days, they continued the transmission, sending repeated pulses of information. They included more about humanity, our curiosity, our creativity, and our achievements. They were careful not to boast, not to seem threatening, but to convey that Earth was intelligent, alive, and worth understanding. And then something unexpected happened. Among the responses, a sequence appeared that was different from the rest. It was clear, distinct, and almost recognizable as an intentional signal rather than a random burst. The astronomer and the engineer stared at it, realizing that this was more than observation. It was acknowledgement. Someone or something had heard them, understood them, and chosen to respond in a deliberate way. The engineer felt a surge of hope. They are listening. They are trying to understand us. This could change everything. The astronomer agreed, but with caution. "Yes, but we still don't know their intentions. We can't assume they are friendly. We just know they are aware, and awareness is powerful in itself." As the days passed, the signals grew more complex. The responses included patterns that mirrored the structure of Earth's message, almost as if the observers were learning how to interpret it. There were no words humans could understand, no sounds that could be heard. But the intent was clear. Earth had entered the consciousness of another intelligence, and that intelligence was reacting to it. The astronomer and the engineer realized that their actions had consequences beyond imagination. Humanity had stepped onto a stage far larger than anyone had ever known. The universe was no longer indifferent. It was aware. And now it was responding. Despite the awe, fear remained. Every decision they made could be critical. Every message sent could change the way these observers saw Earth. If they misrepresented themselves, they could provoke misunderstanding. If they stayed silent, they might be ignored or worse. They knew that balance was essential, that careful, deliberate communication could determine the fate of the planet. They also began to notice subtle hints that Earth was being evaluated in a more detailed way. Some signals seemed to focus on the planet itself, its oceans, its atmosphere, its electromagnetic patterns. It was as if the observers were measuring the environment, learning about the planet's systems, and perhaps assessing its value or vulnerability. The astronomer felt a weight of responsibility that was almost unbearable. He thought of the billions of people asleep on Earth, living ordinary lives, unaware of the silent attention their world had attracted. It was both terrifying and humbling to realize that their fate might hinge on signals transmitted by just two humans in a small observatory and a quiet garage. The engineer worked tirelessly, recording every response, filtering noise, and analyzing patterns. She felt a mixture of pride, fear, and hope. They were ordinary people thrust into an extraordinary situation. They were the first human voices reaching across the galaxy, and they carried the hopes of an entire planet. One night, the astronomer noticed a subtle change in the responses. A sequence appeared that was longer, more deliberate, and carried patterns that suggested recognition. The observers were not just reacting, they were analyzing the message in depth. Earth's voice had reached the minds of intelligence far older and more advanced, and the response was more than curiosity. It was acknowledgement, awareness, and perhaps the beginning of trust. The engineer felt a sense of cautious optimism. "They are noticing our intent," she said. "They are understanding that we mean no harm. This is our chance to make a difference, to show that humanity can be responsible and wise. The astronomer nodded. But we have to continue carefully. Every step matters now. We have their attention, but we can't risk losing it or misrepresenting ourselves. Over the next week, they continued the careful exchange. They refined their transmissions, repeating key information, clarifying intent, and showing that humans were not only intelligent, but capable of cooperation and understanding. They avoided exaggeration or threats, focusing instead on curiosity, knowledge, and peaceful intent. Slowly, they noticed changes in the responses that suggested understanding was growing. The patterns reflected attention, learning, and even calculation. Earth was no longer a silent planet under observation. It had spoken, and the galaxy was now considering it in a new way. The astronomer and the engineer realized that their work had changed history. Humans had crossed a threshold, entering the consciousness of intelligence far beyond their own. The planet had spoken, and in doing so, it had disrupted patterns that had existed for millennia. The responses were still cautious, still unreadable in detail, but the intent was unmistakable. Earth had been noticed, and it mattered. For the first time, both understood the magnitude of what they had done. They were no longer just observers. They were messengers, ambassadors, and witnesses to a moment in history that no one else could see. Humanity had reached out, and the galaxy had responded. As dawn approached, they looked at Earth below them, bathed in the soft morning light. The planet was unchanged, quiet, and unaware of the attention it had drawn. And yet, something fundamental had shifted. Somewhere in the vast darkness, eyes had seen. After Earth's message had been sent and received, the astronomer and the engineer realized that the situation was evolving faster than they could have imagined. The galaxy, once silent and distant, had become alive with attention toward their planet. Signals arrived more frequently, patterns more complex than before, suggesting that Earth was now part of a larger network of observation and discussion. The astronomer sat at his console late one night, staring at the screens filled with streams of data. Each line represented a fragment of intelligence that he could barely begin to interpret. Yet, even in the complexity, a pattern emerged. The observers were talking to one another. Earth had become the center of a conversation spanning countless systems, and the signals suggested both caution and curiosity. The engineer worked alongside him, her hands moving deftly over her equipment. She was amplifying signals, filtering noise, and logging every anomaly. Every burst of data, every change in frequency, told a story that humans were just beginning to read. "They are not just observing us anymore," she said quietly. "They are reacting to our presence. Our message has changed everything." The astronomer nodded, his mind racing. "It's like we've walked into a room full of people who have been talking about us without knowing we could hear. And now they are surprised we exist." For several days, they carefully monitored the responses. Some signals were simple, almost like curiosity patterns that mimicked the frequencies of Earth's own message, suggesting attempts to understand. Others were more urgent, more complicated, hinting at warnings or instructions being communicated among the observers. The astronomer and the engineer realized that Earth was no longer just observed. It was being discussed, evaluated, and considered in ways that were far beyond human comprehension. The tension was palpable. Every day, the two of them felt the weight of responsibility. Millions of people slept, went to work, played, and lived without a clue that their planet had become a point of attention in the galaxy. The astronomer often imagined the beings who were watching vast, ancient, and highly intelligent, calculating and deciding based on information that humans had no way of controlling. It was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. One evening, the engineer noticed a signal that seemed deliberate and different from the rest. It was clear, structured, and repeated in a way that suggested intentionality. The astronomer studied it carefully, his heart racing. "This isn't random," he said. "They are acknowledging us. They are considering our existence carefully." The engineer adjusted her filters to get a clearer reading. "It almost feels like they are nervous," she said. "Like they didn't expect Earth to respond, and now they are unsure what to do next." They realized that their simple message had caused a ripple effect across the galaxy. Whoever had been monitoring Earth had to reconsider their plans. The planet, once just a point in the vast void, had become visible in a way that disrupted ancient calculations and expectations. The astronomer felt a shiver run through him. Earth had stepped into a network of intelligence that had existed for millennia, and humans had entered it unprepared but alive and speaking. For the first time, the engineer suggested that they might not be in danger immediately. "If they are responding with caution and curiosity rather than aggression," she said, "then maybe our message worked. Maybe showing we are peaceful and curious matters to them." But the astronomer remained cautious. "We can't assume that," he said. "Even the most intelligent minds can misinterpret. Awareness is powerful, but it doesn't always mean understanding." Despite the uncertainty, both of them continued their careful monitoring. They logged every signal, every anomaly, and every subtle change. The galaxy was no longer a silent observer. It was alive with movement, calculation, and reaction. The astronomer and the engineer realized that their role had shifted. They were not just observers, they were participants, human voices influencing events far beyond the solar system. One day, a sequence of signals arrived that suggested a warning. It was subtle, not hostile, but it carried a clear message. Earth's actions were being watched carefully, and any sudden changes could attract unwanted attention. The astronomer and the engineer felt a chill. The galaxy was not merely observing, they were evaluating, learning, and preparing to respond based on Earth's behavior. The astronomer leaned back in his chair, exhausted. "We are being tested," he said quietly. "Not by force, not by threats, but by observation. Every action we take could influence what happens next." The engineer nodded, her fingers resting on her equipment. "Which means we need to continue being careful, deliberate, and patient. Our next moves have to be precise." They realized that their earlier message had opened a door. The galaxy had noticed Earth, and the observers were now active participants in this unfolding story. The astronomer and the engineer felt a mixture of pride, fear, and awe. Humanity had crossed an invisible line, one that no other humans knew existed. They were the first to bridge a gap that could change the course of history. Over the next several days, they noticed signals that were almost like questions. Repeated sequences suggested attempts at understanding Earth's environment, its life forms, and even its patterns of communication. The astronomer and the engineer debated how to respond. They wanted to clarify humanity's peaceful intent, but they also knew that too much interference could cause misunderstanding. Finally, they decided on a cautious approach. They transmitted more information about Earth not boasting, not threatening, just describing life, culture, and curiosity. They emphasized that humans were capable of reasoning, cooperation, and care. Every word, every signal, was repeated to ensure clarity. As the transmissions continued, subtle changes appeared in the responses. The observers were analyzing, learning, and perhaps beginning to trust. The astronomer noticed patterns that suggested recognition of intent. The galaxy was acknowledging Earth not as a random planet, not as a target, but as a participant in a larger conversation. For the first time, both the astronomer and the engineer allowed themselves to feel hope. The galaxy, vast and ancient, was no longer indifferent. Earth had a voice, and it was being heard. The signals carried patterns that hinted at understanding, and perhaps even protection. Yet the tension never fully left them. The astronomer often stared at the night sky, imagining the immense intelligence that surrounded them. "We are small," he said quietly one night. And yet we are part of something much larger now. The universe is aware of us. That is incredible, but it is also frightening. The engineer agreed. Yes, but it is also our chance to show that humanity can be responsible, that we can learn, adapt, and communicate wisely. We have a choice now. The days turned into weeks. The astronomer and the engineer continued their careful work, monitoring every signal, analyzing every pattern, and preparing for the next transmission. The galaxy was responding, slowly, deliberately, and with great attention. Earth had entered a network of intelligence far beyond human understanding, and the observers were evaluating it, learning, and perhaps even considering it for protection. One night, a new sequence arrived that was longer, more structured, and clearly intentional. The astronomer and the engineer stared at it in awe. It was unlike anything they had seen before. It suggested acknowledgement, deliberation, and possibly reassurance. Earth was no longer a passive planet. It had a voice, and that voice was now part of a larger system of understanding. The engineer felt a sense of cautious relief. "We have been noticed," she said. "We are being considered. This is our chance to make sure they understand who we are." The astronomer nodded, exhausted but alert. "We have changed something fundamental. The galaxy has seen us, and now it will respond. We just have to continue carefully, thoughtfully, and patiently." For the first time since their discovery, both allowed themselves to imagine a future where Earth might be protected, valued, or even welcomed into a larger community of intelligence. The astronomer thought of the billions of people living unaware below them and realized that one small action, one simple message, had shifted the attention of the galaxy. Humanity had stepped onto a stage that no one else even knew existed, and in that quiet moment, watching the signals stream across the monitors, they understood something profound. Earth was no longer alone. It had a voice, and the galaxy had begun to listen. The next steps would be critical, but hope, however cautious, had arrived. Weeks had passed since the first message had left Earth, and the astronomer and the engineer had spent every waking hour monitoring the signals. The tension in their lives had become constant, yet so had the sense of awe. The galaxy was alive, with intelligence, discussing the tiny blue planet in the vast darkness of space. Every pulse, every pattern, and every subtle shift carried meaning beyond human understanding. That night, the signals arrived faster and more distinctly than ever before. The astronomer stared at the screens, recognizing an unusual clarity in the sequences. For the first time, the messages seemed to carry purpose rather than mere observation. Patterns repeated in a deliberate way, almost like someone was trying to communicate using a method humans had not yet fully grasped. The engineer adjusted, her equipment with steady hands, amplifying the signals while filtering background noise. She felt a mixture of excitement and fear. "This is different," she whispered. "They are no longer just evaluating us. They are trying to reach out, or at least make themselves understood." The astronomer leaned back in his chair, awe written on his face. "We may be witnessing the first deliberate attempt at communication from an intelligence far beyond our own," he said softly. "And this could decide everything about Earth's future." For hours, they analyzed the signals, mapping the sequences, noting repetitions, and tracking subtle changes. Some bursts suggested caution, others curiosity, and a few patterns hinted at approval. The astronomer realized that the observers were no longer neutral. Earth had proven that it could respond, learn, and communicate, and that had earned a form of attention that was both rare and precious. The engineer suggested that they prepare a response, but carefully. They had already sent 2 sets of messages, simple greetings and descriptions of human life and values. Now, the galaxy seemed ready for something more complex, something that could truly show the intentions of a small, curious species. They began drafting a new transmission. It was deliberate, cautious, and human. It described Earth, its life, and its people not in grandiose terms, but in simple truths. They emphasized curiosity, creativity, and cooperation, showing that humans could think beyond themselves and care about the larger universe. Every line was repeated across frequencies to ensure clarity, and every tone was calibrated to reduce any chance of misinterpretation. As they prepared, the signals began to change. There were patterns that suggested acknowledgement, almost like the observers were responding in real time, adjusting as humans communicated. The astronomer's heart raced. "They are listening as we speak," he said. "Every message we send now matters more than ever." The engineer nodded, her hands steady on the controls. "It feels like we are standing at a crossroads," she said. "We can show them who we are, or we can make mistakes and risk everything." Finally, they sent the third transmission. It was deliberate and careful, a message meant to bridge the gap between humanity and intelligence far beyond Earth. They waited, their eyes glued to the monitors. Hours passed with no immediate change, but slowly, the responses began to appear. This time, the signals carried something new. There were repeated sequences that seemed intentional, almost like patterns designed to match human logic. Some segments suggested recognition, and others contained structures that indicated a level of communication they had not seen before. The astronomer and engineer realized that this was more than observation. It was interaction. The astronomer felt a mixture of relief and awe. "They are responding in a way that shows understanding," he said. "Earth is no longer just a planet on a list. We are now recognized as a participant in a larger network." The engineer smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting the glow of the monitors. "Recognition," she said softly. "It may not be friendship yet, but it's more than being ignored. It's a start." Days turned into nights as the patterns grew more complex. The astronomer and engineer noticed subtle hints that the galaxy was sharing information among its observers. Sequences repeated across multiple points, suggesting that Earth had become part of a network of intelligence that spanned light years. Each signal carried a new layer of meaning, and slowly a picture emerged. The observers were evaluating Earth, not just as a target or curiosity, but as a world with potential. One night, the astronomer noticed a change that made his heart race. A segment of the response matched a pattern from their last message almost exactly. It was like a signature, a direct acknowledgement that the observers had understood their intent. "They understand us," he whispered. "They really do." The engineer adjusted her equipment for clarity. "And they are responding carefully," she said. "It's deliberate. It's almost protective." They realized that Earth had passed a threshold. The galaxy, vast and ancient, was now watching with awareness, and this awareness carried responsibility. The observers could choose to continue evaluating, to intervene, or to ignore. But for the first time, Earth had shown itself capable of communication, understanding, and patience. And that had changed the way the galaxy saw it. Over the next several days, signals arrived in patterns that suggested conversation rather than observation. The observers were no longer simply collecting data. They were interacting, responding, and adapting to Earth's messages. The astronomer and engineer spent long hours decoding, mapping, and analyzing, trying to interpret the sequences as best they could. At one point, a sequence appeared that felt almost like reassurance. It was deliberate, repeated, and precise. The astronomer studied it for hours. "It's almost like they are saying, 'We see you, and you are not a threat,'" he said quietly. The engineer nodded, tears of relief in her eyes. "That means Earth has a chance," she said. "A real chance to be recognized as intelligent, capable, and worthy of attention without fear." They realized that their work had made history. Humanity had reached across the void and been noticed. The galaxy, which had once been silent indifferent, or even threatening, was now aware of Earth and willing to respond. Their simple transmissions had opened a door to understanding, and the observers were walking through it with caution and care. For the astronomer and engineer, this was a moment of quiet triumph. They had done something extraordinary. Two humans in a small observatory and a quiet garage had communicated with intelligence far beyond comprehension. They had represented the hopes, curiosity, and peaceful intent of billions. And they had been heard. Yet, even in the relief, caution remained. They knew that awareness did not guarantee safety. The galaxy was vast, complex, and unpredictable. But they also knew that humans had taken a first step, a deliberate, careful step into a wider universe of understanding. In the following days, they continued monitoring the signals. Each sequence carried meaning, acknowledgement, or subtle guidance. They could not fully understand the language, but the intent was clear. Earth was no longer invisible, and its presence mattered. The astronomer looked out at the night sky, the stars appearing both distant and intimate. "We are not alone," he said softly. "And for the first time, the universe knows it." The engineer adjusted the final dial on her equipment, a faint smile on her lips. "And we've shown that humans can be careful, curious, and deliberate," she said. "That may be enough to shape what happens next." As dawn broke over Earth, the planet remained quiet and unaware, spinning silently beneath the stars. But above it, far beyond the reach of human sight, the galaxy had taken notice. Observers that had once marked Earth as a point of interest now considered it with care. Recognition, understanding, and perhaps even protection had replaced indifference or suspicion. The astronomer and engineer leaned back, exhausted but satisfied. Humanity had taken its first step into a universe that was watching, listening, and responding. The consequences of their actions were far from complete, but for the first time, hope had arrived. Earth was no longer silent. It had spoken. And the galaxy had heard Dot in that quiet moment. They understood something profound. Even the smallest voices could matter in the vastness of the universe, and careful, deliberate action could change the fate of an entire planet. Humanity had reached out, and the universe had responded. For the astronomer and engineer, and for all of Earth, that night marked a beginning, a moment when awareness, communication, and courage had combined to open a new chapter in human history. The galaxy had noticed, and nothing would ever be the same again.